one of our services is obviously the LLM service, which wraps at the current moment AI SDK. But we don't want to test necessarily against real LLM providers. And every time we run our tests, we lose $100. That would be bad. So one of the things I did is built a really nice test fake library where the rest of you could just run the main sort of session service and call the prompt method on that, and it'll run all the real production code. But when it gets to that LLM service, it's feeding back predetermined data that you determine in the test. So I made a really nice test mock. So first you can make prompt. It'll obviously block waiting for what would have been HTTP responses to come back in from, say, ChatGPT's model. But instead, on the next line, I can say, LLM.text, what's up? And then that will get fed back it'll sort of be streamed in as the response to the session prompt service. You can do all sorts of really beautiful things that I don't even know. My theory is just people just don't really do it at all. They just don't test it. That seems to be the case. That seems to be why so much software is just, I'm trying to think of a better word than dog shit, but that's the one that comes to mind. So I don't know. Have you felt this? I've noticed that like ChatGPT.com, for instance, so often I'll type a message. I want to type a second message. I can't hit the submit button anymore. Some stream has gotten lost. And with my effect-oriented mind, I just see like a leaked resource or an unclosed stream. An abort signal that wasn't propagated is most likely the culprit, because that's hard to do right. And you have to do it all the time, everywhere, and be very careful about it. And there's so many sort of foot guns. It's just sort of a golem constructed entirely out of foot guns.
So just to bring this back, we're basically walking through the migration from the OpenCode code base with like pre-effect to increasingly effectified, where you've mentioned that by now you basically have a parallel implementation of pretty much everything that's fully effectified, and you're about to flip this over completely. But I think you're still walking through the early stages of like, how did you kick things off? Also, how did you win the trust of the rest of the OpenCode team to like get on board with this, to change the way at that point status quo way of writing TypeScript to now embracing this?
Yes. Okay. Thank you. Yeah, I'm sort of turning this accidentally into Zeno's podcast or Zeno's Paradoxo podcast, where we'll never get through the first question. We're going to keep getting halfway there and going off on tangents. But hopefully it'll be a good journey to nowhere. Yeah. So services. I implemented a service. So some tangential service, a new service that involved this other project that I was working on, some kind of service that was logging into that. Dax wrote the original version. Had a PR. I knew it wasn't connected to the rest of the infrastructure, so I basically effectified that, turned it into a service. It went well. And from there, I tried to just hunt through the rest of the code base. I mean, many code bases are oriented as services, even if they're not effect services, even if they don't make their boundaries too clear. Every file perhaps is a module. There's some kind of internal dependency graph that you can track. So I tried to find a good inlet there. And I think, generally starting at either the bottom or the top is good. Burning the candle at both ends can work. But also you can start really anywhere. I tried to find some simple services. I think I can show off some code actually at this point. Not that it's going to be
if it's easy enough to understand.
Yeah. And so, it's not.
While we're pulling this up, I'm curious, like, how did you choose that service? Like what I've seen a lot is that people adopt effect really motivated, centered around a particularly burning problem. And like often it has to do something with testing. So I'm curious, what was that burning problem that you were reaching for, like a services abstraction right away? And that is probably also buying you some trust and goodwill from new colleagues who are well aware of this problem and might be skeptical of like new technologies. And seeing it like solve a real problem probably goes a long way to build up a lot of trust and to get the goodwill to do the effect migration.
Yeah, luckily I had some cover because, well, I was hired knowing that I was totally deranged by effect, and that there would be no stopping me. So I took that as some encouragement, and then I was mostly optimizing for something that wouldn't break everything. I think I was more afraid of making like I already had enough goodwill and trust to do this. They were already sort of sold in effect. The only thing I could see sort of undoing that was if I destroyed OpenCode for millions of users. So it was more like minimizing the impact, at least at the beginning. I knew the benefits would come and things would become more testable. I think one service I started with, I might be wrong on the order. The PR, it's all open source, so you can track all the PRs if you want and go through the history of whatever 400 PRs I opened in the last couple months. But I think there's permission and question services. So I'll just start with question. So this is like the ask user question tool, right? So I can say something
just
like,
for the folks who are just only listening, we're basically just navigating through the OpenCode code base at this point, and we're looking at a few different modules. I think you're using Z here, and obviously also running OpenCode on the side to get some more information about the code base as we do these days. We don't like look things up ourselves anymore, but we get it explained. And so, yeah, we're looking here at a few schema definitions, which I suppose is related to some of the early work you've been doing.
Yep, exactly. So we're looking at the question service. I'm sorry for the audio people. This might be a little weird, but I'm sure we'll go on many tangents that are more amenable to just the spoken word. But the question service is basically, there's this ask user question tool that I think Claude Code first had, where the agent has a tool call available to you where it can submit questions. And then you see in your UI, in this case, a numbered list of possible answers that you as the user can answer, or you can
It's like a
type
little
your own answer.
form as a TUI.
Yes, a little TUI form here. So I asked OpenCode to ask me a bunch of questions. It's obviously pretty random questions because it has no context. It's a new chat. So it asks me for my current goal, what would you like me to help with right now? I don't know, let's say review some code, so I can hit 3 there. How much detailed, okay, whatever. And then research only, fine. And then I can confirm these results and it'll get those results and continue looping with that. I'll interrupt it here. But the question service is the one that tracks which questions have been answered, the user's responses, and when it's all done. So there's a bit of asynchronicity here, which is always a good place to use effect. Once again, that wasn't the primary service. I wanted to start by not destroying the code base and ruining my credibility. But there is also a little bit of extra benefit here. Something that there's some somewhat meaty amorsely about this with regards to concurrency and asynchronicity. And so at the top, I do have some schemas. So the question option, there's like a label and a description. So I guess that's sort of what is actually, I forget what is indeed what here. I should look at this exactly again. I think, the answer is what I'm offered.
So we're effectively modeling our situation here. So if you think about this form, we have questions, we have like different options to answer that question, and then we get answers, hopefully.
Exactly. Yeah. And the nice thing is that some of this was already designed, albeit in Zod and raw promises. So I didn't have to think about the design of the system just yet. I'm excited for multiple passes where I can improve things or sort of apply my taste and opinions to the overall data modeling. But my goal originally was like, don't do 2 things at once. If you're going to be refactoring a giant hundreds of thousands of lines of code into a new paradigm, don't also interleave sort of semantic logic changes. Because if something breaks, I didn't want to not know, okay, was it the effect migration that broke it, or was it my other logical change that I couldn't resist?
Don't change too many variables all at once.
Yeah, that would be very frightening. Need to isolate the variables. As you'll see here, I also, on a lot of these schemas, I tend to use schema.class. Just, I don't know, I like the way that reads. One of the downsides of TypeScript is sort of its general verbosity. This is why I was sort of stuck in Scala for so long, is that you do have to sort of repeat various identifiers multiple times for various reasons. Luckily, And this is something, another tangent we can go on down the line, is like AI, I think, not only helped affect adoption, but also, well, yeah, AI for me personally made effect more feasible. I was such a curmudgeon that I loved Scala's terseness and expressivity, as they like to say, which basically just means you don't have to write a lot of redundant code. It's kind of that single source of truth principle, except even at the syntactic level. Just like you write the bare minimum that expresses the idea. With TypeScript, sometimes you have to duplicate yourself.
I
However,
think
agents
what's
make this painless.
exactly.
Mhm.
Like now it's basically you no longer need to write it yourself. So when you had to suffer twice before, where you had to like by hand write out the duplication, then still read the duplication. Now we only have to bear with the reading the duplication, which is more tolerable.
It's more tolerable, and also the brain's really good at pattern matching. So
Yes,
once this, your brain recognize, I like all I see now is just okay. There's an option thing. There's option. Everything else kind of blurs out in the background. And of course, maybe one day we'll have in our IDEs sort of projectors that can, instead of just syntax highlighting, we can sort of restructure the syntax. Because if we're not editing the code, we can just sort of read a simplified projection. We could project this into another language that we like. So I could read this as Haskell or whatever. The Unison programming language kind of has support for this. But anyway, that's not here yet. Maybe that'll never get here. It probably doesn't matter, because this isn't really a pain in reality. I get better at reading TypeScript. But you'll see that each of these does have a static read-only Zod property, because I should probably open source this. I mean, it is open source. It's just all in line. But there's an effect to Zod converter. So there's the schema to Zod converter, because we need this at the boundary for the Hono server, so it can generate its API documentation and parse things.
That's how you basically created this like still lasting bridge between the old world and the new world, where you didn't have to do a big bang migration, but you could essentially still have a single source of truth throughout the migration, but still like feed it into the old system and use it in the new system, or vice versa.
Exactly. So yeah, we have this boundary problem, and general. I mean, effect makes this fairly painless, right? So you need a way from going from the promise boundary to the effect boundary, and then from the effect boundary back to the promise boundary. So you can run effects as promises, and you can wrap promises as effects. So effect.promise it actually gives you an abort signal, which is really nice.
Yep.
Even though most people don't use that in their promise code. And then you can call out to some other, AI.generate text, and you can pass in the
signal,
the abort signal as an option or something. And that'll turn that into a promise. And of course, you can also do effect.run promise and take some effect and get back a promise of its result or whatever. Right. So you have to do these at the boundaries. And there's some tricks that you might have to do in a large code base like this. And we can get to that later on. I mean, it's all open source once again. So there's some details there if there is some complexity, which this code base does definitely have. And then I had that same problem with Zod and schema, though I don't think I ever go from Zod to schema. Because you have less of these stacks, right? So yep. I just defined the base implementation. I just started at the leave nodes instead of like having Zod, then schema, then Zod. I started at the leave nodes and built myself back up, converting to Zod at the boundary so that we could use it in the Hono server. And that's basically, so earlier you asked me before about the Hono server. So I do these days have an HTTP API, but basically both are pointing to the same underlying, at this point, effectified services. This one just calls effect.runPromise basically before calling these things. Or I have an app runtime.runPromise on the effect services, whereas the HTTP API can just sort of yield whatever kind of service I'm using .do thing directly instead of having to run to a promise.